else. So we've covered all of the information that effectively I want to cover this semester with you guys in XPhys. Now we're going to touch on a couple other ancillary topics, which will play into just understanding physiology and how all those things work together. But I'm a big proponent of the basic concept of knowledge without application is useless. So my goal is not to have you guys try to be Dr. Google. My goal is that you guys can apply the things that you've learned in this course to working with yourself, your patients, your clients, etc. Okay. So does anybody have any questions about all the way back chapter 1, how does a muscle contract, the basics of muscle physiology, through our energy systems, through the endocrine system, the neurological system, the cardiovascular system, the pulmonary system, the way that those are going to adapt and change to training, and effectively those really important principles of training and how those are going to be obviously a big factor on how we're going to make things happen, what's going to occur from acute compared to chronic adaptations to training. And that's an easy one for people to, I wouldn't say misinterpret or misunderstand. What's the difference between an acute response and a chronic response? That's open to anybody. What's the difference between an acute response and a chronic response? You can put it in the chat. Okay. Not bad, not bad. You guys are touching on the important keys. Acute is literally like right now. So if you guys get up and go for a jog, your acute response is your heart rate is going to rise. Your stroke volume is going to go up. You're going to be utilizing probably a lot more aerobic glycolysis in your muscle cells. There's going to be much more blood flow to those areas. You're going to be maybe even doing some anaerobic glycolysis, depending on the speed at which you're going and your ability to supply blood flow. That's the acute. So that's your body just immediately trying to change to deal with whatever stressor you're placing upon it. Chronic is going to be those lasting adaptations that's going to make you better over time. So if we do that same running example, the chronic adaptations is going to be, we're going to increase our blood volume, but first it's going to be the plasma levels, and then it's going to be the hematocrit, aka the red blood cells number. We're going to increase the amount of capillaries to our muscles and do a better job of vasodilating to them. We're going to see changes in our type 1 fibers and even our type 2 fibers, mitochondrial density, energy stores, and enzymes related to aerobic metabolism. You're going to see an increase in the size of your left ventricle, and obviously to a certain extent your right ventricle, because we're going to pump more blood per beat. Those are chronic adaptations. So you have to apply the stressor more and more times. Yes, so by increasing our plasma volume, Braden, what you're going to do is, first of all, you've got a greater amount of fluid that you can rely upon, which is useful for both heat adaptation and for increasing that left ventricle filling at the end of diastole, so the relaxation. So if we have a greater filling, we're going to typically have a greater stroke volume because we've got a much better ability to effectively clear that blood out of the heart. So effectively, it's instead of your muscle going from effectively in this really tightened position to the midway, now we're going to fill it even more. So it's going to go a little beyond. So now we've got a better essential stretch and overlap. So boom, we're going to pump more blood each beat than we did beforehand when we were only pumping in the smaller amount. So, and the plasma volume is going to increase because we're going to have more plasma proteins, and effectively, naturally, that's going to pull a little bit more electrolytes, and that change in osmolarity is going to pull more fluid and retain more fluid in your plasma when you're at rest. And then obviously with time, because exercise is going to effectively have less oxygen going to your kidneys, which is going to signal the kidneys to release erythropoietin, because obviously they're not getting as much oxygen. So that erythropoietin is going to signal for the cells in your bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. But that takes a much longer period of time. So that's that adaptation that takes about a full month, whereas the plasma change is going to happen over about a week. So, Zach, do you feel like that kind of helps you parse between acute and chronic adaptations? And then Braden, does that help you with the plasma? Awesome, guys. So we are going to hopefully have what is going to be loosely defined as some fun today. Now, like anything else, fun is obviously very much so up to the individual who thinks that they're having fun. So obviously that might not be you guys. That's okay. We're just going to have ourselves and look at some craziness, but hopefully you guys are going to have a decent time breaking this down. So this is a sport that quite frequently I enjoy sometimes making fun of, but it's a sport. And these people that compete in the CrossFit Games are incredible athletes. I'm not going to diminish the abilities that these folks have. Yeah. So the 2020 games are obviously over. Here's the effective events that these folks would have been doing. Now, I'm going to divide you guys into effectively 5 separate groups. Okay. The groups are going to be randomized. And what you guys are going to do, so group 1 is going to have the events on the 18th. Group 2 is going to have the events on the 19th. Group 3, 23rd, and so on and so on. Now, your goal is for your day, you need to break down what energy systems are being focused on the most during each event, and effectively, you know, which one would need the most improvement in general for the day, or which would you want to have the optimized the most? Then I want you guys to think about fiber type and how you would want which muscle groups in the body to be more of one type of fiber or the other to get through the exercises of that day. And then effectively, finally, what other, we'll keep it simple and we'll just look at the nervous system. What needs to be optimized? Does that make sense to you guys? I just put a lot of stuff out there. Okay. Now, just to give you guys an example, okay? So before we get you guys in your groups, give me one moment, and I'm going to bring up the 2019 CrossFit Games. Power of the Googles. Okay. So, for example, if I was to go ahead and break down only effectively the August 3rd day, okay? So notice it's sprint course, it's pretty much lower body. So you probably want to have effectively as much type 2 fiber as you're going to have, and Lord knows as much type 2X. Depending on the distance, obviously that's going to influence whether we want to see a little more 2A. So pegboard ascents, double unders, split snatches, clean and jerks. Notice cap of 20 minutes. So we're talking about this is going to have a big aerobic component and since it's going to be climbing and then Olympic lifts, and you only have to climb once, you would arguably want to have maybe more type 2 fiber in your lats. But since you need to be able to do jumps, you jump the weight overhead, you jump the weight overhead, you need to have arguably a little bit more well aerobically adapted 2A fiber. And then finally, this is just F off heavy cleans. So you would figure this is going to be really ATP PCR, and you're going to go ahead and effectively have to try and lift those weights, relatively quickly, but it's just 1 rep max. So this is ATP PCR. So notice anaerobic glycolysis, ATP PCR, definitely just ATP PCR, and then aerobic component as we have the longer day. Now, 1 rep clean. Notice we don't really have a whole lot of upper body musculature. It sounds odd. Yes, you have to support the weight, but it's not the big component that's going to allow you to be successful with pushing a weight overhead. Because if you ever see Olympic lifters, they're not usually like massive upper bodies. They're developed, but nowhere near as much as what you'd see in a bodybuilder or a strongman, because their goal is to let their legs do the work. Obviously, you need a certain amount of core stability and you need those muscles to be developed, but really it's more about having really efficient movement patterns, obviously, in each of these movements, along with the mobility to get into appropriate positions and do it well. And there's a big body weight component, because anytime you're sprinting, climbing, you need to effectively have the best power to weight ratio you can. Whereas the goal is just to clean, then really the bigger humans lift heavier weights. So there's no disincentive of being larger. Does that make sense of how I broke those down pretty quickly, to give you guys an idea of kind of how to approach it? Good. And you should be able to look at the results, guys, so you can figure out how long it took the men and women in these events to effectively do the entire exercise or all of the exercises. And if you have an idea of obviously how long it took them to do it, then you've got a pretty good idea of effectively, okay, here's the energy systems they're going really hard in, because they're going to be trying to finish this up as quickly as possible. Nice. So the nervous system, Zach, remember we want to have improved rate coding, intra and intermuscular coordination. So that way we're going to be able to do these movements effectively as quickly as possible. And the nice thing about, and it's a sport because, people can obviously win a lot of money doing it, of CrossFit, is you never have to fight another person. So you really don't have to worry about things like you need to with sports like baseball, football, basketball, where you have to react dynamically to another individual. You have to read the defense, you have to read the offense, you have to think down further. Instead, this is all about pacing strategies. So we would arguably want to have a decrease on that central governor or peripheral fatigue, whichever mechanism we're going to say is holding somebody back. We want to have obviously as great of ability to innervate those muscles and to innervate them in the most efficient way possible. So we're going to be able to do these movements without any extra wasted effort, as well as being able, obviously, to utilize our fibers as efficiently as possible. And so for things like sprinting, yeah, there's gonna be a little bit of change in direction, but this is all coming down to the individual information, probably when you have more efficient muscle spindles, more essentially inhibited Golgi tendon organs, but we want to effectively make sure that we can do things neurologically, because I'm sure a lot of you guys have tried a number of these movements. I mean, if you guys want a good laugh, I don't know if you'd be able to find it easily, but feel free to look up videos of me doing cleans. It's bad, partially because of shoulder mobility and partially because of me being young and stupid and having no interest in improving my technique. And so what you're looking for is obviously the most efficient movement patterns you're going to get given those exercises. So obviously you want to see a certain amount of specificity. Whereas something like this, where it's just a ruck run and you're literally just running with a pack on your back, then, well, yeah, go figure. You just want to effectively go left foot, right foot. And humans are pretty good at that. Whereas if you look at things like, bar muscle ups, obviously you need to have a great power to weight ratio. But the real thing that I think a lot of people would get destroyed by is something like a handstand walk. Because I don't know about you guys, but doing a handstand for me is difficult enough, much less trying to balance on my own, much less trying to walk 132 feet in that position. Also, after you've rowed 800 meters and done 66 kettlebell jerks on each side. At least the weight's crazy light, but that's still a whole lot of reps. So, questions, comments, concerns, guys? All right, have fun. There's no wrong answer, but really try to break it down to the best of your ability, guys. I'm putting the link up to this also in the chat. So you guys got that along with my basic instructions. You guys got 20 minutes. We might go a little bit longer. Okay, I'll check in with you guys. And I want you to go ahead and talk it over with your group and figure out, okay, this is probably the best thing you can have, or this would allow you to have the best performance on each of these days. And think of it breaking it down muscle group by muscle group. So hint, hint, hint. Something like this, we're going to have to have really good endurance, muscular endurance in our deltoids and triceps. Whereas this is more anaerobic, and that's specifically more with the lower body. Make sense, guys? Sorry for giving group, effectively who ends up in group 2 an advantage. So have fun, guys, and I will see you guys back in a little bit. All right. Rooms are open. Hop in. Have fun. Sorry, realized I muted myself. Good work. I like what you guys were doing whenever I went into each individual groups. Obviously, we talked a little bit longer than I was intending, but that's okay. So overall, guys, what is going to be the major energy systems that you're effectively living in for each of those days that you guys had? And you guys can unmute yourself, or you guys can go ahead and put that up in the chat. Mm-hmm. Good. A lot of aerobic glycolysis and a lot of anaerobic glycolysis is pretty much where we're living on each of these days. Now, the neurological components, we touched on that, and I said it kind of before we left, which is you're just going to be really good at these movements. So you're going to have really good rate coding, really good inter and intramuscular coordination. You're going to have a really good job of effectively being as efficient as we can with each of those movements. Now, which of those movement patterns are going to require a greater amount of essentially cerebellum development along with vestibular sense than pretty much any other you see out here? So the question, Jordan, is of the different movement patterns that you guys had on the different days, which of them is going to require the greatest amount of vestibular sense development and cerebellum development? You can throw them in, Catherine. That's fine. You're good. Bingo. The handstand sprint and the handstand hold both are going to require really, really good balance in an upside down position. And let's face it, a lot of folks, they might be obviously strong enough to do a lot of these movements, but then you've got, bingo, the major issue of trying to balance while on your hands for a freaking 100 yards or as long as you can hold it. So good. Obviously, you can see how you've got to have pretty good aerobic development. You've got to have pretty good anaerobic development. And then the ATP PCR is going to be built in as we go through. Now, which part of the body had the greatest amount of aerobic requirements on each of your guys' days? Absolutely, Braden. Now, obviously, I believe it was group that had day one. Notice you've got a row, you've got yourself, thrusters, which is going to be a relatively total body exercise, as will the pull-ups, especially the way CrossFitters do them. And then same thing when we have handstand push-ups and deadlifts. Once again, it's a total body. So we really just have to have pretty good overall aerobic and anaerobic development. But then obviously with the rowing, that uses the legs. That's where you're getting a lot of your power from, but the upper body is still a component, specifically the pulling musculature of the upper body. Now, I apologize, we've gone over, but what questions do you guys have for me? And from what I was getting from each of your groups when I was talking with you guys are on the right track and you're thinking about it correctly, and that you're breaking it down by movement pattern, the muscles used in those movement patterns, and then looking at the duration and in turn, obviously the intensity you're going to be doing each of these movements with, which is going to be effectively, informing us as to which energy systems we're really having to live in. Questions, comments, concerns?